Hey everyone, in this video we will set up a React app using Vite. We will touch on file structure, JSX, JavaScript, components, UseState hooks, props, and CSS. Let's get started. I'm using VS Code, which is free and available for Mac or Windows. So if you don't already have VS Code, then feel free to download and install it unless you have another IDE that you prefer to work in. I'm using a Windows machine, so some of the command syntax may differ if you're on a Mac, but a quick Google search will point you to the proper syntax. We're going to need a directory where we can create our project and work from, so go ahead and create a directory anywhere on your computer, and then you're going to do File, Open Folder. I just happen to call my directory example. Let's click View and select Terminal to bring up our terminal window. To create our app, you will first need Node.js installed. Here's their website. There are different methods of installing Node.js, as you will see on their page, but the more popular method is to download the Node.js installer and install it that way. We will also be utilizing npm, which is automatically included with Node.js. As with VS Code, it's completely free. Now that we got everything we need, let's get started building our app. Now type npm create vite at latest. Create Vite is a tool to quickly start a project from a basic template for popular frameworks. So we're going to enter Vite-React for our project name. As you can see, there are plenty of frameworks to choose from here, but we're going to go ahead and select React. We can go ahead and select JavaScript. We're going to cd into our Vite-React directory. Now we're going to type npm I for install. This will install all your necessary dependencies like Vite and React. npm run dev. This is how we're going to open our development server. By default, Vite uses port 5173. If we click on this link while holding down the control key, we can open the local host in our browser. So now I'm going to bring up Chrome and we can see the landing page created by Vite. It's a pretty simple landing page. Let's take a look at our file structure, which we can see is pretty slim, not overwhelming at all, and each file serves a clear purpose. If we go into our package.json file, we can see a few dependencies going on in here. Dependencies are the crucial packages required for an application to function in a production environment. Now, dev dependencies are really just tools and utilities that aid in the development process, but are not needed during production. For our scripts, we have dev, which will run Vite, and in turn will run our dev server. The build script will create a dist directory with a production build of our app using rollup. Then the preview script is simply a way to run a preview of our production build. Lastly, ESLint statically analyzes your code to quickly find problems. Vite config contains all of our app configurations. Right now you can see we're defining our React plugin, since React is the library we chose during our project creation. You can also install other plugins. You can define a dev server object here as well. As mentioned, the Vite default localhost port is 5173, but I'm going to define port 3000 instead. Let's go ahead and save this. Control S in Windows, Command S in Mac. And we can see down here in our terminal that localhost has now been updated to port 3000. So if we open this link again, we can see that we are now using localhost port 3000. The index.html file is the main entry point into our application. The purpose of this file is really just to load our first JavaScript file, which is main.jsx. In the source directory, we will notice a few CSS files for styling and a few .jsx files. All right, we're going to start demonstrating the best parts of Vite React. But first, I want you to bear with me while I drive home some core concepts, some of which you may already know, but understanding these fundamentals will really be key in your development journey with these libraries and frameworks. First off, what is JavaScript? Along with HTML and CSS, JavaScript is one of the most used internet programming languages. JavaScript is unique because it can run directly in your browser, not just on a web server. JavaScript is simply a scripting language adding functionality into your website. What is JSX? JSX is an addition to JavaScript syntax, which is a mixture of HTML and JavaScript. This makes it easier to visualize the UI structure when creating React components. .jsx is a file extension used for JavaScript XML, primarily associated with React, which is a popular JavaScript library for building user interfaces. In a Vite React project, .jsx files are used to define React components and contain JSX syntax. To be clear, a regular React project can use both .jsx and .js file extensions, but Vite React projects give you .jsx out of the box, so you can use them without additional configuration. Vite's fast refresh and hot module replacement work seamlessly with these files, really enhancing the development experience. If you're using TypeScript, you might encounter .tsx files, which serve a similar purpose but allow for TypeScript's static typing alongside JSX. Finally, what are components? In a Vite React application, components are the building blocks of your user interface. Reusability. They allow you to create reusable UI pieces and manage your application's state and behavior. Encapsulation. Each component manages its own state and logic, leading to cleaner and more organized code. This encapsulation makes it easier to understand and test components in isolation. As mentioned, our index.html file calls up our main.jsx file. And when we take a look in here, we really don't see much going on besides this app component being imported from our app.jsx. And when we go into our app.jsx, we can see it has some state for a count along with a button that will increment that count, as seen when you click the count button on our landing page earlier. Let's take a look at components. I've brought up Chrome next to our VS Code to make it easier to view our progress. Let's open up Developer Inspection window in Chrome so we can catch any errors. Simply right-click in Chrome and choose Inspect. Anytime we want to stop our development server from running for any reason, in the terminal you can typically use the Ctrl+C keyboard shortcut on both Windows and Mac. This will interrupt any currently running npm scripts or commands. In the terminal, type npm run dev, and that will get your development server going again. Next, open app.jsx. We are going to delete everything in here except for an empty function, an empty return statement, and an empty export statement. Let's add some div tags. And h1 heading tags containing hello from my app, and click Save. We can see the changes reflected on our web page. Now let's remove this heading and then click Save again. We can see our heading is gone. Inside your source directory, create a new folder named Components. This is where we will store all our components. Then create a new file for your component. One thing to note is that components in React always start with a capital letter, and it's common practice to use Pascal case, where the first letter of each word is capitalized. So let's go ahead and name this component myComponent.jsx with a capital M and a capital C. Then open up that file. We can type in RAFCE and then enter to use the React Snippets extension. Prior to React version 17, it was necessary to import the entire React library using import React from React. But now you typically only need to import the hooks and other specific parts you're using. This makes your code lean and more efficient than importing the entire library. So let's go ahead and delete that import statement. Now I'm going to add some h1 tags and enter in hello from my component. Let's save that. Open app.jsx again. Let's import our component into app.jsx. Now let's add our component within the div tags. Let's save this file. We can clear this error from earlier. We've successfully just created our first React component and brought it into our parent component app.jsx. This is React's official site, which I encourage you to take a look at later on. Here, among other information, you will also find information regarding React hooks. We won't go into great detail today regarding all of these hooks, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we will discuss and utilize React's UseState hook, which you can see here. Just know these other hooks do exist, and this page contains valuable information about them. Let's get started. In order to access React's UseState hook within our component, the first thing we will need to do is import it at the top of our component page like this. A hook is a function that gives you access to React's internal memory. You gain access to a value and a command to modify that value, basically a query and a command. Now let's define a state by writing const. Then enter the name of the variable you wish to create. We named our variable count. Then you will input the name of a function that will update the value of our count variable. It's common practice to prefix the name of this function with set. So we will call this variable setCount with an uppercase C. Next we say this is equal to the UseState React hook. Then assign an initial value to our count variable. We are going to set our initial value to 0. Now let's add a button element to our component. Then we want to display this variable on our page within our button element. So we will say count is, then add some curly braces and pass our count variable to the button element. Here we are accessing the onClick event for this button. Then we're saying each time this button is clicked, we want to call this setCount function we defined and we will pass it a new number to update our count variable with. The number we are going to pass is our current count plus 1. Now remember, the current value of our count variable is 0, since that's what we defined as the starting value. So here we're saying take the current value of this variable, which is 0, and add 1 to it. So if we click this button, we will get 1, and then each time we click the button, the variable value will keep being increased by 1. Let's click save and we will see our new button. This is all part of React's HMR, or Hot Module Replacement, which exchanges, adds, or removes modules while an application is running without a full reload. Each time we click this button, React will update every element that uses this state, which in our case is just this button element. But it's really cool that instead of re-rendering the entire page when something changes, our React hook will only re-render the affected elements. If we go ahead and click the reload button in Chrome, we'll see that our state variable gets set back to 0 again. We're going to demonstrate a brief example of utilizing React props. But first, I would like to move my terminal window out of the way to give us a little bit more coding real estate. We do not want to delete the terminal because currently, as you can see, we're running our local host displaying our application. So we're going to simply hide the window by clicking this X. Then anytime you want to unhide the terminal, simply move your cursor here until you see the double arrows and then click and drag up. Also, you can utilize multiple keyboard shortcuts like holding down your control or command key and pressing the letter J like this. But for now, we're going to keep our command window hidden. Let's go ahead and create another component. In this example, we will display customers on our page. In the components directory, create a new file called customer.jsx. Now our naming convention for our first component, my component, is not a very good naming convention. This customer component is more in line with how we would actually want to name our components in the real world. Something clear and meaningful. We already know it's a component since it's in the components directory, and more importantly, it's a .jsx file that begins with a capital letter. Remember, React components always start with a capital letter. Type in RAFCE, click enter. Let's go ahead and remove this import React statement. We're going to keep the div tags, but we're going to add an H2 element. So we got a customer heading. Click save. Open up our app.jsx file, and we need to import our customer component, and then we need to add our component here. Add our customer component, and now when we click save, so our parent component, app.jsx, now references two children components, my component and customer component, and we can see both of those components displayed on the same page. Right now our customer component just contains an HTML heading element, but we want to go ahead and utilize React props in this example. So React components use props to communicate with each other. Every parent component can pass some information to its child components by giving them props. Props might remind you of HTML attributes, but you can pass any JavaScript value through them, including objects, arrays, and functions. So let's go ahead and bring open our customer component. The way we get our component function to accept a props object is we need to include this props parameter. So I'm going to type props. I'm going to go ahead and create a paragraph element. Within that element, I'm going to type name, colon, space, include our curly braces because that's how we're going to inject JavaScript into this. I'm going to say props.name, and I'm simply just going to go ahead and copy this down. I'm going to say age, for our customer age, and age. Click save. Head on over to our app.jsx file. Right now we're not passing any actual values over to our customer component from our app. So if we look here, all we're seeing is these simple strings, name and age over here without any information. So what we need to do is pass along some information. So if we go in here to customer and we type name equals, and we'll say Sue. We're using quotations because it's a string literal, but for a number, age equals curly braces 21, and we click save and we see Sue is 21. Now we can go ahead and we can click this whole element here and copy it again. And we're going to say Ken is 33. We're going to save that. And now we can see two different customers within that customer component being passed over. So this is key value. So name being the key, value being Sue, age being the key, and 21 being the value. Now let's get into a little bit of CSS here. So let's open up first our index.css file. Let's scroll to the bottom. In our index.css file here, which is our global CSS file, let's make a CSS class called global CSS. And we're going to do background color is going to be equal to purple. Go ahead and click save. Now let's go back over to our app.jsx, and up in the div tag we want to do class name equals global CSS. Click save. So in normal HTML, we access our classes with the keyword class. In JavaScript, class is a reserved word. So we're using class name here because JSX is actually transpiled into JavaScript. So when we transpile our JSX into JavaScript, we can run into errors if we use the word class. So this is why we use the class name. Now this global CSS file, index.css, that we're using here, as I stated before, it's really global, more for defaults for the whole entire application. But what if we want to customize the styling of each of these components differently? So I can show you a little bit different way to do that. So let's go ahead and delete the CSS class reference here. And then let's go back into index.css and delete that class that we made. Click save. We can see our styling went away here. I'm going to introduce you to a CSS concept in React called CSS modules. It's a way to locally scope CSS by default React components. They allow you to write CSS styles in a modular and encapsulated manner, making it easier to manage styles and avoid naming collisions. Also, it really helps if your application starts to grow. It just helps to make your CSS a little bit more organized and cleaner. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a couple CSS files. We're going to create one CSS file per component. So in components folder, let's create a CSS file called customer.module.css. Next, we're going to create another file, new file, myComponent.module.css. Enter. In order to speed things up, I'm going to go ahead and paste CSS styling into the style sheet for my component. You can see I defined a base CSS class called myComponent. And then over here, we're using myComponent, but in particular, just for buttons. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And then let's go ahead and go into our myComponent.jsx file. So first we need to import our component level CSS file. So import styles. Next, we're going to need to reference that component level CSS file on our div tag. So it's class name equals curly brackets styles.myComponent. Go ahead and click Save. So as you can see, we're pulling in this styling from myComponent module, where this is our background color. We have our font color as blue, some padding, and then this is specific to the button, where we have a background color of red, some white text, and some padding. So now let's go ahead and add some styling to our customer component. Let's open up our customer.module.css. I'm going to, again, paste in some styling. Click Save. Let's open up our customer.jsx file. And let's go ahead and add an import statement to import that component level CSS file. Import styles from customer.module.css. Now we can reference the class name in our div tag. Class name equals curly braces styles.customer. Save. Let's bring back up our component level style sheet for customer and see what's going on in here. So we can see we have a customer CSS style defined here, background color green, padding 10. We have a border with a dark green separating out each of our customers. And then we have a style specifically for the paragraph element. So remember, these particular names and ages of the customers are utilizing the paragraph element. So that means all this styling applies to those elements. And if we wanted to say, for instance, change blue to purple, go ahead and click Save, and we see the live updates right here. We can even take things a step further and organize our code, components, CSS files even more. Let's go ahead and do new folder within our components folder. And we're going to call this one customer. Then we're going to add another folder. And we're going to call this one my component. We're going to drag in the customer.jsx and the customer CSS file into our customer folder. And it's going to say, are you sure you want to move the following two files? Move. Now it's going to say update imports for customer.jsx. Yes, we do. Let's do the same with my component. Drag that in there. Move. Do we want to update the imports? Yes, we do. Let's go ahead and close out of these files here, clean things up a bit. Save. And let's refresh. Now we can see things are back to normal, But what we did here was we went ahead and organized our components so that if we start adding more and more components, let's say we had 7 components and then 7 CSS files, things would start to get a little bit convoluted here. So this just cleans things up. And if you open your app.jsx file, when VS Code asks us if we wanted to update our import statements, for example, when we move the customer component into its own folder, you can see that folder name was added to this directory path. Hopefully you enjoyed this introduction of Vite React. If you did, please let me know by liking and subscribing. I really enjoy passing along knowledge, so if there's any things you would like me to expand upon, please let me know in the comments. Happy coding!